Hello, everyone. LC Holt here, and this is my update for the week of June the 15th. Today, we have an excellent show for you. Why do I say excellent show? Because we're going to be talking about Bill and Ted in honor of the new trailer that's dropped for the third Bill and Ted film. And joining me to discuss it, as always, is Rebecca Ivey.
Hello.
Hello, Rebecca. So, you and I are about the same age, and this was sort of our childhood, these Bill and Ted movies. And we're going to have some, hopefully, I think we're going to have some fun going through these films.
I wish I could have. They're in storage, in my sister's storage. My Bill and Ted action figures.
Yes, I remember those. I do remember.
With the phone, I had the phone booth.
Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted
That's
Theodore
right.
Logan.
I had Bill. My sister had Ted, and I had Rufus. And then I had the phone booth, and then she had the speaker with the cassette tape, and you'd plug the speaker into them, and you'd squeeze their legs, and they would look like they were playing instruments, and music would come out of the speaker.
So you got the full Wild Stallion experience.
That's right. I did.
Yeah. Well, I guess let's jump into this.
Okay.
We're not going to start with the new trailer. We're going to save that for chronologically nearer the end. We're going to start back in 1987 when Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson wrote the script. Now, Chris Matheson, for those of you who are science fiction and horror fans, is the son of Richard Matheson, the great author of books like I Am Legend and Somewhere in Time, A Stir of Echoes, amongst others. So he got his writing talent honest. Him and Ed Solomon got together and they wrote a script, a spec script, which in Hollywood lingo means you didn't write it because you were paid. You wrote it because you wanted to sell it eventually. So they wrote this spec script called Bill and Ted's Time Van, was the original title. Now, in this script, Bill and Ted were actually 14 years old. They were younger. So I guess kind of the far end of the Goonies age range, you know what I mean? And they were sort of hippie kids with like cool T-shirts and bell bottoms and, you know, but they were the same kind of characters. They were like surfer dudes who wanted to start a band. Go ahead.
Weren't there originally 3 characters? Like when they first started, like they did like an improv thing or something, or it's like a skit.
Yeah, that's how the characters came about. It was Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson did like a stand-up skit, like a Second City sort of thing, only not at Second City. And 2 of the characters they created were Bill and Ted, these kind of like not quite stoner dudes, but sort of surfer dudes who, you know, played air guitar and were trying to start this band, Wild Stallions, and had no talent. I mean, that was part of the funny part, is that they were going to change the world with their music, but they couldn't play the guitar, you know. And it was really just the 2 of them, but it was like they were going to be a 2-man band, you know. And so that's also problematic in the kind of music that they're trying to make. They're just 2 guys that can't play guitar trying to play, you know, over each other. And now, the third, when you're talking about the third person, that might be based on the original script, because originally Rufus was older than them. He was a 28-year-old. And in the original script, he owned this van. And so when Bill and Ted borrow his van, they go back in time, and they wind up in Nazi Germany in the original script. That's their first stop. Now, Charlie Sheen was considered to play Rufus when he was supposed to be a younger man. It's kind of the older friend, right? Now, in that version of the script, as I said, Bill and Ted go to Nazi Germany, and they wind up kidnapping Hitler. Okay, and they kidnap some other people through time, like Babe Ruth and Charlemagne. And I think Bill and Ted in the original script, they can't pronounce Charlemagne. It's sort of like Socrates. So they call him Charlie Mangay or something, you know, and that was sort of the running joke instead of Socrates. But, you know, pretty early on, I think even Solomon and Chris Matheson realized that the Hitler thing might be a little problematic with modern audiences. Because originally they brought Hitler back and he spoke at their presentation. And I don't know, it's maybe you could say it's like producer style humor, but they didn't really think this was going to fly, even before the producers got into it. And of course, the producers were like, hell no, you're not putting Hitler in there. So they eventually changed that to Napoleon, and that's how it remained throughout. Instead of getting, Hitler, they got Napoleon, which Napoleon you could have more fun with because, at least he wasn't, a genocidal madman. So that's how the Napoleon thing came about. The van was cut. You can probably guess why the van was cut. It was cut because they didn't want comparisons with Back to the Future. You get in the car and you go and you drive and you go back in time. That's a little too similar. And we have to remember this is 87, so this is like 2 years after the original Back to the Future.
I always liked the phone booth. I always thought it was kind of clever. You dialed a number to get where you were going. Each time had a phone number and they had a phone book.
And that's right. And that was the fun part, that there was a phone book. Instead of you would just look up the time period you wanted to go to and just dial it in. That is, in its own way, that is as clever as the DeLorean in Back to the Future. And I always liked the little, it looked like an umbrella without the fabric that would shoot up at the top, and then eventually it breaks and they're just like gluing it together with gum and shit. But anyway, that's how the phone booth came to be, is they were like, we can't use a van. So they shopped this script around. Like I said, it was a spec script, which meant that they didn't pitch it to a producer who gave them money to then write the script. They just came up with it and they were like, oh, maybe someone would want to buy this. Well, Warner Brothers considered buying it, but I think the brass at Warner's they weren't completely sold that this is how kids talked. And I don't think they really got the humor of the story. I think they thought it was a little too silly. And so ultimately, after sort of flirting with it a little bit, Warner's passed on it. And so then, Dino De Laurentiis, the great producer who produced so many movies, amongst them being David Lynch's first big budget films. He produced Dune for Lynch, and he also produced, after Dune, Blue Velvet. So he was very instrumental in getting David Lynch's career going. I mean, obviously Mel Brooks was probably the henchman for Lynch's career because he gave him the big break of making Elephant Man. But then after Elephant Man, Dino De Laurentiis really pushed David Lynch. So go Dino on that. Big Lynch fan here. But he also liked and saw promise in the script for Bill and Ted. And so he wound up putting up $8.5 million for a budget. And he hired the director. And the director he hired was Stephen Herek, who prior to this had written and directed that movie Critters, which has since become a cult favorite, And Stephen Herek actually has directed quite a few movies. We'll talk about that here near the end, quite a few really successful movies. But at this time, other than Critters, he was a little bit of an unknown commodity. But obviously the key to this whole thing is you got to find a Bill and you got to find a Ted, right? They auditioned the hell out of Hollywood, looking for anyone that could be even remotely within that age range. Over 300 actors auditioned for Bill and Ted. And the way they would do it, they would bring the actor in and they would just read both roles. Because as the producer said, the roles are so similar, you could really just kind of interchange. At least that's how it seemed on paper, and I can kind of see that. Seeing the movie, I can kind of, I mean, there are differentiations between, like their parents, because there's, Ted with his dad has a different dynamic. And then Bill has got this really weird thing going on, his stepmom, Missy, and Missy is this hot lady that's not much older than him, and he doesn't know whether to call her Missy or Mom or what. So there are those things, but on paper they were like, well, these are similar enough characters. Maybe if you could play one, you could play the other. And
yeah, because I had heard that Keanu was after the Bill part originally, right? Or he read for Bill, like they were reversed and they switched them around.
That's something that they talked about. Alex Winter went on to say that was a little bit of a myth because he said that everybody auditioned for both. But I'll tell you some of the actors, okay? Get your reaction on some of these actors that auditioned. Some of them will probably be pretty self-evident, like River Phoenix.
Yeah.
I mean, River was like the after Stand By Me and some other films. He was like the young actor.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could see him playing these sort of like Venice speech kids, the surfer kind of guy, but because he always seemed to me kind of serious. I mean, he did
Yeah.
comedic things, but that I mean, what do you think of that choice?
I mean, I could see why, but because he was in
Name.
everything at that point.
Yeah, yeah, he definitely had the name value.
Yeah.
The next one is, I think, more of a callback to an earlier film because Sean Penn was considered.
See, yeah, I'd heard that one. But
Yeah.
at this point, I mean, he's.
And when you think of Bill and Ted and you think of Sean Penn, the only deduction I can get from that is Spicoli.
Yeah, Fast
You know,
Times, yeah.
a producer saw Spicoli, had him as Spicoli, and we're like, well, there you go. There's Bill or Ted, one or the other. But like you were saying, I mean, go ahead with what you were saying by this point.
By this point, I mean, he's too old. I mean, he's not, but you know what I'm saying. At this point, I mean, he's with Madonna. He's, doing his, close range and Shanghai Surprise, unfortunately.
Yeah. Which I would just love to see an interview with Sean Penn now where someone brought up Shanghai Surprise.
Oh, yeah.
Just to see his face.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was one considered. Another one considered who would later go on to have success with, movies like Encino Man was Brendan Fraser.
Okay, yeah.
A very young.
I heard of Pauly Shore auditioned.
That's right. Yes, he did. He did. And this was.
There's a clip of him and he's talking to Keanu and he kind of makes a joke about, well, we know who got the part. And it was when he was still on MTV.
Yeah.
During that period, he was talking to Keanu Reeves. So, yeah.
Well, that's almost like a Spicoli thing. It's almost like you take his persona from MTV, the Weasel, and go, well, that's Bill or Ted, a producer thinking this.
Yeah.
But yes, that's true. He did audition. Like you said, Keanu Reeves was was the first actor to get one of the two roles. He got Ted. And so then after that, the auditions became, who do we pair with Keanu? It was sort of like, because you want to have that chemistry, because obviously, you can't have Ted without Bill. Now, Alex Winter enters the picture. He had already done movies like Lost Boys. He'd appeared in quite a few films, and he was of the right age range. But I think more specifically, he and Keanu Reeves hit it off early in the auditioning process because they both had an interest in music and riding motorcycles. So they had a lot of stuff to talk about. And so this chemistry seemed almost instantaneous. So when they auditioned together, I think they got a sense that these two guys are just kind of, they just have a natural sort of chemistry.
Yeah.
And it definitely plays in the movie. I think you would agree that if you didn't have the chemistry between those characters, there's nothing. I mean, you need to have that sense of two characters that can almost finish each other's sentences,
Yeah.
Now, like I was saying before, Rufus was originally supposed to be a younger guy. Rufus wound up being the last character cast. And they were even filming the movie when they cast Rufus. They were already shooting this thing, right, in Arizona. Because it was shot in like Phoenix, Tempe, and Scottsdale, Arizona, in those kind of towns. And but they didn't have a Rufus. They had already decided to make him an older character than the guy who owned the van. Like he was not going to be 28 anymore, and that he was going to come from the future, this utopia future in which Bill and Ted have changed the course of humanity with their music. and everyone says things like "be excellent to each other" and "party on," which I might want to point out the "party on" thing. This movie did come before Wayne's World, and some people have pointed out similarities. Like maybe the Wayne's World characters were a little bit of a ripoff of Bill and Ted. I don't know. I'm not going to say anything there because I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but I just wanted to kind of point that out. Wayne's World, Bill and Ted did it first. It's like The Simpsons did it first thing.
And also, you have to think they filmed and then it didn't release until much later.
Yes, and we'll go into that. We'll go into why.
So, So, I mean, it was way before.
It was way. Yeah, these characters existed. And even if you go back to Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson's stage skits, way before. But some of the people considered for Rufus once the change was made to an older man. I'll throw these out there. The first one is probably the most obvious because there's a lot of references to this person in real life, but Eddie Van Halen was considered for Rufus. What do you think of that? I mean, not known as an actor, but...
Yeah, not known as... That's what I was kind of thinking of. I'm like, can he act? And then, I mean, would it kind of be weird that they reference him so much? I mean, was the script a little different? And then there he is? I mean, was that supposed to be like the ha-ha-ha joke? Or...
I think it was more going to be like the ironic thing, you know,
Yeah.
like we're talking about... It's sort of like meta before there was meta, you know?
Yeah.
Talking about Eddie Van Halen, and he's playing one of the characters in the movie.
Yeah.
Another person considered, and you can kind of see this because the actor who was eventually hired has a connection to this person, was Ringo Starr.
I could see that. I mean, they look similar. I mean, particularly the way they made Carlin look.
Yeah, and remember they both played the conductor.
Yeah, they did.
So that's sort of another. Now this one I think you're really going to get a kick out of. Sean Connery was considered for Rufus. Now that would have been a whole other kind of mode. I mean, I'm not against it.
You know what my brain went to? Highlander.
And that's exactly what I thought too. I mean, because it was, you know.
How he looked in part 2. Remember where he's getting the new suit and everything, and his new duds. Yeah.
And the first Highlander was around the Bill and Ted time, so you can see him with the ponytail and everything. You know? And so what do you think of Sean Connery? What do you think of him as Rufus?
That would have been interesting. I mean, obviously, you know, we grew up with it, so it's hard to see anyone but, you know, Carlin. But I think Ringo would have been. Yes, because Ringo
is a naturally funny guy.
He is. Yeah. I mean, all the stuff. Remember when he was on Saturday Night Live in the 80s? Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, he is a very funny dude. But then again, so is Sean Connery. Sean Connery can be really funny.
Yes, he can. Yeah. Like I said, that's why I referenced Highlander too, because he had a lot of little funny bits in that one.
Yeah.
Remember when he first comes back and he's at the play and he's like harassing the actor?
Yeah. And I also think of even little throw-off lines in movies like The Untouchables, you know, where Connery's chasing the guy and he just shoots into the air and he's like, enough of this running shit, you know?
Yeah.
He's got a lot of good lines. Or in The Rock. He's incredibly funny in The Rock.
We need to do Highlander next. I'm throwing that out there. So put that in the comments if you vote Highlander. Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely hit on the Highlander. Roger Daltrey. Roger Daltrey. He was the fourth person considered. They kind of went through.
See that actually?
Yeah. They kind of went through a certain kind of rock star, you know, there for a while.
Yeah.
Sean Connery excluded. And also the man who eventually got the role, the late, great, the immortal George Carlin, who I am a huge fan of.
Yes. And I love my Rufus. I mean, that's why I had the action figure. I loved Rufus so much, you know.
Yeah.
And he had keyboard.
Rufus was a great character, and
he was.
The reason Carlin came about being in that role was the producers of the film had worked with him previously on another movie, and once they'd gone through this long list and they still didn't have a Rufus, they eventually just said, "Well, what about Carlin?" And I think the director was like, "What about Carlin?" You know, and then that's how he got. So he kind of stepped into the movie well into shooting, and you can't really tell it. I mean, it's it's just always George Carlin.
I love the line when the phone booth like something's afoot at the Circle K.
Yeah. That was my first time ever. I mean, I can't drive past a Circle K.
I know you think about it.
Yeah, because there's Circle K references in the first one and in the second one, which we'll get to. But
you gotta get that icy. You gotta get that icy and sit outside and say that.
Yeah, something.
They should just put a phone booth outside of one of them. You know,
with the little umbrella thing on the top.
That's right. So it's like a photo op. You know?
I would love to see that. Like Circle K. Circle K should jump all over this.
They
You can just imagine the phone booth coming down from the circuits of time. Oh, by the way, the circuits of time was an early use of CGI.
That's right. Yeah.
Because that was that they utilized computer graphics to create those circuits. And when they were flying, there's some funny stories from the filming of the movie where the actors were like, when they were filming inside the phone booth, basically the phone booth was set up on a gimbal with crew people on the sides operating the gimbal against a green screen. And they used to talk about how they hated the phone booth scenes because sometimes people would get sick. You just get in there for hours and they would just gimbal you around inside this phone booth. And you can imagine when you're cramped in there with as many people who wind up in that booth as they do. That was probably that was pretty a hellacious ride, in the words, I guess, of Bill and Ted. Some of the people they cramped in there, bogus, heinous. But they always use heinous as a good thing. You remember, they're not quite sure. They're not quite sure the definition of heinous. Billy the Kid wound up in that booth. Sigmund Freud, Joan of Arc, Socrates,
which was played by Jane Wheedlin of the Go-Go's.
Yes, very true, very true. And she got to do some awesome aerobics because it was the 80s.
That's right.
Abraham Lincoln, Beethoven, they were all stuffed up in that booth at one point or another.
I liked when the booth was sideways and they're all hanging out of it because there's so many of them. That's
right. Yeah. And they kind of suspended disbelief a little bit into how many people you can fit in a phone booth. But I'll buy it. Anyway. When they were editing this movie, they actually thought the original ending was underwhelming because in the original ending, Bill and Ted give the report at, in their classroom. And then after that, the princesses, which they get from the past and become their love interests, they take the princesses to the prom. And they edited the movie and they put all that in there and they looked at it and they were like, well, this kind of builds up to, a book report in a classroom and, a scene at a prom. And the first cut, by the way, was well over 2 hours. This was a long first.
Wow.
Especially.
Why would they collect the historical figures then? It
was the same thing. They were just in a class.
Okay.
But there was no big show made of it. It was just like a line of people. And so the way they decided to punch up the ending a little bit is they went back and they reshot in an auditorium and almost made it like a rock concert.
When I was a kid, I was like, where did they get all these lighting people?
Yeah.
This high school. Did they go back and steal some, rock lighting guys from the 80s? And
they had a full rock concert sound design on that.
That's right. Yeah.
I have no idea. Maybe Socrates was over there operating the board.
Maybe.
But they cut the prom scene, and they also, in trying to get it down to a reasonable length, which is for this genre is about an hour and a half, they had to cut a lot of stuff. They cut there's a whole character called John the Serf, who was just this non-famous medieval person that appeared a couple times. They cut him out altogether, even though he's credited in the crawl at the end. But he's not in the movie. They cut out the prom sequence at the end where they took him to the prom. There was a whole opening where Bill and Ted kind of dance to school playing the air guitars and then get harassed by bullies. All of that was cut out. So they just kind of, and it probably helped the movie because the movie goes at a good clip,
It does. It's a tight movie. Hitting all the points. It doesn't
lag at all. And I'll give that to both the Bill and Ted movies. Neither of them are boring, that's for sure.
Yeah. And the creators were in the movie, remember?
Yes, they were.
The ice cream scene.
They were.
Which is, whenever I was ever being a pig, or one of us were being pigs when we were little, that's what we would sing to each other.
Well, and also the Napoleon. Napoleon is used to great comic effect because he's the first person brought back. So you see how Napoleon reacts to modern thing, like going to the park, the park called
the water park.
And it's called Waterloo, which is, funny. And he refuses to let the children go down the slides. He's a dictator even on top of everything else. But let's get into the release of the movie. Before it was released, Dino De Laurentiis' company was in financial straits, which might sound crazy because of all Conan and all these great movies he produced that were huge hits, but he was having some problems. So he decided to shop it around to distributors as soon as possible. A lot of the distributors, sort of like Warner Brothers was at the beginning, didn't get it. But what Dino did, which I think was pretty smart, was he showed it to them with an audience. So when the studio guys saw the audience reacting the way that they did to the movie, this set off a bidding war to try and get the rights, because they were like, obviously this movie works. We don't get it, but it works. And so Orion Pictures eventually won. They paid $1 million for the distribution rights, which I'm sure helped Dino a little bit. And that's how it wound up being released by Orion. It was released in February of 1989 and grossed $40 million on an $8 million budget. Pretty damn good.
Did you notice, like, okay, because so much time had passed between, them filming it and then doing publicity shots, the famous picture of, Ted in the wig, that awful wig he's wearing.
Yeah, because Keanu was off doing other movies, and
yes.
And then they finally released the movie. It was sort of like a You're Next experience, because we waited a long time for that movie to be released, but more on that on another show. It's kind of funny because Orion, we're talking about financial troubles for Dino De Laurentiis. Orion, shortly after this movie was finally released, had huge financial troubles.
Yeah.
And again, they released some big time movies in the 80s.
I know, they were big.
Huge, yes. Great movies. Really good movies with great talent. In fact, they were considered a mini studio for a long time, like a mini Big Boy, in other words. It's sort of a contradiction in terms. But that was kind of how they were looked at. So, I mean, big deal studio, and going through bankruptcy not long after this movie was released. So they thought, we have some good properties. Let's see, what can we do to make some quick bucks? I know, Bill and Ted made a whole shitload of money, so let's make another one of those. Wisely, they got Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson to come back. And I think this is the thing that is the uniting factor with this whole series, all three of the movies, soon to be three, is that you always had those two guys writing the scripts. So the creators, and that's obviously not the case with many, many franchises. Eventually the creator says, okay, I've had enough, and walks away, like, James Cameron did, for instance, for Terminator, which was an Orion movie. So Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson returned. Ed Solomon, by this point, was like the Orion guy, because Orion had developed the Addams Family, and he wrote the script for that, even though I think Orion sold that off to Paramount, I think. When they were in financial straits, but Ed Solomon went with it. Stephen Herrick had decided not to return for the sequel, to direct the sequel, because he was directing Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, which
another
classic
favorite.
Yeah. Well, let me before we get off the subject of Stephen Herrick, I just want to throw out, speaking of childhood favorites, some of the movies that he directed. He directed the first Mighty Ducks as well as Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He directed The Three Musketeers. Remember the one with the all-star cast with Chris O'Donnell? He directed Mr. Holland's Opus with Richard Dreyfuss.
I remember that one, yep.
And he directed the remake of 101 Dalmatians.
Yeah, okay,
with Glenn Close. So, he went on to great fame.
He was the 90s, like, family movie guy.
And all of those movies I mentioned had an audience and a following. So he did pretty well for himself, even though he did not continue with Bill and Ted in their second adventure, which really wasn't an adventure. It was Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Yeah. What did you think of the second one?
I watched it today because I'm not as familiar with it. Okay. So I wanted
so many times.
I wanted to kind of because my memories of it, I saw it in the theaters.
See, you're lucky. I begged. Okay, so segue. Saturday morning cartoons, I watched the Bill and Ted cartoon.
Yes.
And if you remember, there were two versions of the cartoon. The first one was owned, I can't remember what studio did the first season or so of the cartoon, and all the original actors voiced the characters.
Really?
And that one, if I remember, that season was the season that they actually did the time traveling. Because I remember, like, my two favorite episodes, and I still remember it. One was they broke Missy's vase, so they went back to China way back when to get one, and that was like a whole episode of them, trying to get a new vase for Missy. And the other episode I really remember is they were trying to meet Mark Twain, and Mark Twain's on the riverboat, and he's calling, because it was like a measurement thing, and he's like, Mark Twain, and they're running like, where is he? And then he's like, what are you talking about? And obviously it's Mark Twain, but he's Samuel Clemens at that time, Yeah. And those are the two episodes I remember, and those were the ones that were voiced by the original actors. And then eventually it went over to Deke, and the animation changed, and the actors didn't come back, and it was like they weren't time traveling. Like, I remember there was like an episode where I think they got stuck in a TV show or something. It was like stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But I bring this up, I know in this long tangent, but I remember like seeing the trailers on Saturday morning for Bogus, and I wanted to see it so bad. And my parents were like, I'm not taking the theater to see that, And eventually it came on VHS, and they were advertising it. And I nagged my mother until finally she stopped off, got a movie gallery card, and rented it for me. And I was so excited. I had my figures. I was so excited. And when I first saw it, I remember feeling, this is, because I love time traveling movies. And obviously there's not really much of that. No. It's totally different. And it was just a lot of things in one movie, Not only did they go, because it was supposed to be called Bill and Ted Goes to Hell, but the robot guys, that weird alien thing that they picked up in heaven, all that stuff. I remember as a kid thinking, this is kind of weird. I like to see Bill and Ted, but I remember as a kid going, I like the first one better. That was me as a kid. I mean, I still watch the second one because I enjoy watching Bill and Ted, but yeah.
I had a similar reaction when I watched it in the theaters, because I looked at it and I was like, again, I was a big time travel fan, and Back to the Future was like the shit
for me too. Yeah.
And so when I started watching the movie, I did feel a little bit. I remember this. I remember who I went to see it with in the theater, and it's so crazy, but it's a childhood thing, And I do remember a sinking feeling, going like, it's not time travel. It's not. I didn't like it as a kid. I'll be honest with you.
And did you notice, like, the bad guy was the in Mighty Ducks? Remember, he was the guy that was Emilio Estevez's, I guess mentor, you'd call him, that owned the skate shop.
Yeah, sure was. He was in quite a few movies around the early '90s.
I remember thinking, because I saw it later, years later, I went, that's the guy from Mighty Ducks. It kind of clicked,
Yeah.
Like,
but he was also in Alien 3. He was like that kind of heavy character, So yeah, I mean, we can talk a little bit about the plot, why it's so different. Basically, the plot of Bogus Journey is that in the future, the dude from the Mighty Ducks, he sends a couple of evil robot duplicates, Bill and Ted, back in time to murder them before they play the Battle of the Bands. And so they succeed. And so Bill and Ted then face off with the Grim Reaper, who's played by the great William Sadler.
And I love the Grim Reaper in that movie. I will say that was the highlight for me, was the Grim Reaper in that movie.
He does a great job of playing the Grim Reaper. And, and the whole thing about the Grim Reaper is, you can come back to life if you win a duel with him. And then, but they wind up playing things like Battleship and
Twister. I love the Twister.
Yes, right foot on green, and that's what loses. And then after he can't get his right foot over to green, he becomes sort of he becomes kind of subservient to them, and he has to help them throughout their.
I just love what a sore loser he was. He kept, it was like best 3 out of.
Right, and. And that's, again, it goes back to, like, even in the first movie, there is a sense of goofy silliness, but there's also a sense of referencing things that if you are grown up, you can still get a lot of those jokes.
Yeah.
And obviously the William Sadler character in Bogus Journey is a reference to The Seventh Seal, the Ingmar Bergman movie with death.
You know what I wished as a kid? Remember when they went to heaven and there's like all these historical figures? I'm like, wouldn't it be great if they ran into one of them that they had and they remembered them? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
Here comes Abe Lincoln. It's like, hey.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
that's what that was my childhood self wanted. You know.
Well, I got to tell you another thing while we're talking about slight disappointments with Bogus Journey. Carlin's role is severely reduced.
I was about to mention that as well. When we started talking about Grim Reaper, I really missed Carlin a lot because I was just like, I want more of him. I love Rufus. Give me Rufus.
Because Rufus is only at the beginning, and then he's at the very end with one of the loves of my life, Pam Grier.
Oh yeah.
She unzips her thing and takes off her skin. Suddenly, Rufus is standing there, and it confused me as a small child because I had such a crush on Pam Grier, and then she turned into George Carlin. But I'll let that go.
Is that why you're a Carlin fan?
No,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
I love them both, but I don't want to think about them as the same person.
Yes, I understand. Yes.
There's a lot. Something I noticed in watching it again today. There's a hell of a lot of Pepsi product placement in this movie.
Oh yes.
Everybody drinks Pepsi. You just imagine them taking, doing the Bowie thing, with the Pepsi can. And also, I noticed some of the costume design in the future. I'm thinking those huge fucking boots. How do people walk around?
Yes. Yeah.
Because even the bad guys wear these huge boots. And you watch the movie, and even some of the extras seem like they're having some trouble getting around in those things. There's a darker tone to the movie. Even though it's still silly and fun, they are, as you said, they are going to hell. There's some kind of crazy sequences when they're there of, Ted being afraid of the bunny rabbit, of the Easter bunny.
Yeah.
And then there's Bill's fear of his grody grandmother, who is also played by Alex Winter. He plays a dual. Actually, he plays 3 roles because he plays Bill, he plays Evil Bill, and then he plays the evil grandmother in hell that's coming after him. Give me a kiss, honey. And also, I think there was, the first movie had catchphrases like excellent, and party on and that kind of stuff. But they tried to kind of wedge in a lot of catchphrases in Bogus. Yeah. Like station.
Yeah.
They keep going
which was the alien.
Yeah. But even before the alien shows up, they're going that's as if it's a good thing. Like, hey, I love that thing. Station. You're like, what the hell does that mean? Station.
Yeah.
And instead of doing a wedgie, they call it a Melvin.
Yeah.
What the hell is that? I'm assuming they're referencing a person they wedgied, and so it's a Melvin. I don't have any idea what the hell that's all about. But, those were some of the things that jumped out at me about Bogus Journey. And also I remember Marvel Comics did. You know how they used to do?
They had issues. Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, and it actually came because they did a special Bogus Journey movie adaptation. And then that hit it up so well, that was such a huge hit. They made an entire comic series with the same artist and writer that continued the story.
I remember those when I was a kid. I never got one, but I remember the comics. Do you remember? Okay, do you remember they did a TV series?
Live action?
Yes.
No, I don't.
All new actors. It is like store brand Bill and Ted. I'm telling you, it's awful. You can find it on YouTube, okay? I remember hearing about it, and then years later, I was Googling, I was YouTubing Bill and Ted stuff, and it popped up on my search, and I was like, it's sort of like when I hear Red Dwarf had an American pilot, I'm like, and I heard it was on YouTube, I was like, okay, I've got to watch this dumpster fire. Yeah. And it's bad. It is so bad. It is terrible. Rufus is in it. Bill and Ted, and they are awful. It is awful. It is just vomitous. The episode I saw, they leaped into a soap opera, I think.
Now, are we talking about? It sounds like Sam Beckett's about to come into it.
Well, they didn't leap, but somehow they ended up and I couldn't watch it all. It was that bad.
But are we talking about one pilot or a whole series? Because I don't remember
They
this.
did several episodes, I think. I'm
Huh.
not sure. I don't know much about it. I just remember hearing about it. And then years later, I was on YouTube and I went, oh, this is it. This is it. And I think that there have been some documentaries made where they kind of show like pictures and a clip of it. But you can watch some of it on
Hmm.
YouTube. I
I don't
mean,
know.
it's like some UPN quality, you know.
I don't know how I missed that one, but
It's
is it?
awful.
Let me ask you this: is it as bad as that terrible Ferris Bueller TV show they
Oh
had?
God, Lord! I don't know. I was about to say I was going to say I think I'd rather watch the League of Their Own TV show
That was a
than
terrible one. That one I do.
watch the Bill and Ted. Oh, I remember that because I was excited
Yeah.
because I loved League of Their Own, and I was there for the first episode and I watched it because remember there was that shot of them walking on the field from the movie and it cuts. It's like, wait, this not even the same people.
Yeah.
And that was film quality, and now this is TV. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, that I remember our first episode on the Ferris Bueller TV show because I'm a
I've
big
seen that.
Ferris.
Yeah.
I'm a big Ferris Bueller fan, and I remember watching that on TV. And one of the first episodes, the little twerpy guy who's playing Ferris Bueller, like
You're
takes
like,
out a cardboard. He
no.
takes out a cardboard cutout of Matthew Broderick and like chainsaws it. And I'm like, who the fuck are you? You are no Matthew Broderick. And then
You're
that
and
eventually,
and
that
you're thinking you're
eventually
terrible.
well, that
What's
eventually turned into the show Parker Lewis Can't Lose,
I was
which was
going to say, yeah,
that
yeah,
was a much better, well-received show. People that
yeah.
had a huge fan base, and it went on for years, starring Corin Nimick.
But in the Ferris Bueller was oh god, who was Jennifer Aniston the sister?
I want to say she was, yes, just another Jennifer. Yeah, uh, yeah, Jennifer Aniston, I think, was the sister, and I don't remember who played Ferris Bueller. It was not Corin Nimick. Who played him. It was some other guy who I don't know. I'd have to go
See,
back
they
and
should have had the guy from Parker Lewis.
it probably would have been successful even as a Ferris Bueller if you had
If they
Corin.
had just said
But
Parker Lewis should have been like Ferris Bueller Can't Lose or something like that.
the best way I could say it would be it was like to Ferris Bueller the movie what Saved by the Bell the new class was to Saved by the Bell. You know, just like people you go, well,
Yeah,
you are no Zach
yeah,
Morris. You know.
yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
jumping back into Bogus Journey, I wanted to talk about the, when it came out. It was made actually for a lot of money compared to the first movie. They more than doubled the budget of the original, even though they were in financial straits. The original Bill and Ted had an $8.5 million budget, and the sequel had a $20 million budget. So they could afford him going to hell and the giant, devil and all that kind of stuff. But with the edgier tone and with a mixed critical response, because amazingly, the critics were really nice to the first Bill and Ted movie, which always shocks me because they usually don't understand things. I mean, I'm talking about big time critics. This is long before the internet. Everybody became. But at that point, there were like 3 critics: Leonard Maltin and
Roger Ebert.
and Gene Shalit. You know, those were the Gene Shalit with his big old fro. Those were the best critics.
Right. He looked like Bob Ross's unhappy cousin.
Yes, and that ridiculous mustache. But anyway, amazingly, the critics. Well, Roger Ebert actually was very kind to this movie, Bogus Journey. He gave it 3 out of 4 stars, if you can believe that.
Wow.
But not all of them were like that. It was very mixed, and the film financially underperformed a bit if you consider the budget. If it was the budget of the original, it would have been a big success. But with a $20 million budget, they grossed $38 million. Yeah. So $20 million plus advertising costs. I'm not quite sure if they probably broke even, but probably not too much more than that. I think maybe they did it a little too big in terms of the budget. Otherwise, it would have been a hit. But anyway, it was released July 19th of 1991, and there wasn't a long wait, between production and it being made. Obviously, Keanu Reeves had already become a star by that point. but not the megastar he would eventually become throughout the following years. Because we're talking about after that, there was Point Break, and then he went on, of course, to do the Matrix trilogy, which blew him up, and then John Wick, the John Wick series, which is huge. Everybody knows Keanu Reeves now. He's a big megastar and quite a nice guy, from what I understand. I've never met him, but I've never actually heard a bad word about Keanu Reeves. And you can't say that for many actors of that caliber. So it was always surprising to me that the one person who pushed for more Bill and Ted was always Keanu Reeves. Because as you know, with actors, once they become mega famous, that's usually not the case that they want to go back to what, some thing they did when they were 20, 21, 22 and, revisit that kind of stuff. For instance, if you brought up Spicoli or Shanghai Surprise to Sean Penn now, I just don't think his reaction would be all that positive. I certainly don't think he would want to go back and do Fast Times at Ridgemont High 2. You don't know what I mean? And he's like, I've kind of gotten beyond that sort of an attitude. And I could be wrong. I'm putting words in Sean Penn's mouth. He might want to do Fast Times 2. I don't know, but I just get the instinct he probably doesn't. But Keanu really wanted to revisit Bill and Ted. So much so that he pushed for Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson to get together and write a third movie, which they did. Way back in 2011, they finished the first draft. So this has been brewing for quite some time.
I know. I've been hearing about, and it got to the point I just thought this is never going to happen. They kept talking about it and talking about it.
Yeah. And at first I was like, are you serious? Like Keanu really wants to do Bill and Ted?
Yeah.
Like I wanted to see it, but it just seemed so odd after all the movies he'd done, and he kind of became known as this badass action hero, like John Wick killing people with crooked eyebrow, and then you get this, and it's like and to me it was like at first I was like, that's really cool that he's pushing to play Ted Theodore Logan again.
And it's and as long as it's taking them to when they announced they were finally doing it, I have to be honest, I was a little afraid. I was like, maybe they should have done this in the 2000s, because I guess I was worried about how much time has passed. Would they be able to pull off these characters? Yeah. I mean, how are you these characters at this age? Obviously they're not going to be.
That's an interesting idea. Well, we can talk a little bit about the story of the new movie, Bill and Ted Face the Music. Basically, Bill and Ted, as you kind of have to address the age difference. They're now, much older men. They're middle age. Their marriages are sort of on the brink. They have children that don't like them. Because remember, you had the two kids that appeared at the very end of Bogus Journey. Because they went off and learned how to play the guitar and also had some kids with the princesses.
And had their beards when they came back.
Yes, and Bill had this huge ZZ Top beard.
Yeah.
And Keanu was sporting this weird devil goatee thing.
Yeah.
Sort of a Fu Manchu type thing. And so now Bill and Ted they were always meant to write the song that would change the future and turn it into this utopia. Apparently they have kind of failed to do that after all these years. And so as a result, time and the universe itself is starting to crumble because they have not fulfilled their destiny. And so a visitor comes from the future to tell them to get their act together and gives them basically an hour and 20 minutes to write the song that's going to change the future. So no pressure. No pressure. Now I wanted to talk about Alex Winter has talked, in many interviews over the years since this was announced about how excited he was to do it. And people ask him a lot of questions about, things like George Carlin. George Carlin sadly died in 2008, so that's quite a while ago now. They said, well, are you going to replace Rufus? And Alex Winter was like, there's never going to be a replacement. We're not recasting it. So ultimately what they've decided to do is, and that was kind of my thing too. I was like, there's no Carlin, no Rufus. This kind of sucks.
I know.
But he will be in the movie using footage from the first two movies. They're going to do a computer enhancement. And so George Carlin will be in the movie as Rufus. Now, it's probably going to be very minimal. because you know how that stuff goes.
I was going to say it'd be like Carrie Fisher in the last Star Wars movie.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
Is it going to be like, where they're having basically a conversation with themselves and it just cuts to her going, yes. Yeah. Oh, I say a line that they think might fit in, but the other character's just basically having the conversation by themselves because she can't have it.
I'll tell you, Leia was in all kinds of leading conversations in that movie.
I know.
She did a lot of good nods in that movie. But of course, we did a whole show on that. We did a show on, I don't know how we squeezed 3 Star Wars movies, especially the sequel trilogy, into one show.
Yeah.
That was a tough one because you could easily do an entire hour just on The Last Jedi.
Yes.
And I still think on that show we might have undercut The Last Jedi a little bit. We could have gone a lot more into that. And not just the CGI. But yes.
Well, I'm interested to see what they do with Rufus then. I mean, I'm a little nervous because, like I said, the whole, Carrie Fisher thing. But then again, I think it'll be, I don't know. I have to wait and see.
And really, like, if you think about it, you can do it well if you're careful.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I don't think either of our problems about the Carrie Fisher CGI was that it looked bad.
No.
I mean, it looked like she was there. It was just the problem was that
dialogue.
That you could tell that this scene was written around the fact that she was no longer with us.
Yes.
And they're just trying to plug in reactions they already had.
And she's such a big I mean, Rufus is too, but in the other movie, I mean, he's not like Leia in his mini scene. You know what I'm saying? He just kind of comes, gives them the keys to the time travel, and then leaves, and then
And I would not be the least bit surprised, if it was just one scene, like a cameo.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That's fine.
I mean,
I would rather
Bogus.
that.
He was at the beginning.
Right. I would rather that than have it look bad or be weird like the Carrie Fisher, with too many scenes. I think that was the thing with Carrie Fisher. There's maybe too many scenes.
Too many, yeah.
But anyway, but like I was saying, CGI technology in that sort of way has come a long way since like the Game of Death. Do you remember when they tried to cut together Bruce Lee's last movie? And I remember this very vividly, and I just have to get this out of my system. There was a scene where Bruce Lee's character is sitting at a mirror. And the way that they did it was they took a photograph of Bruce Lee, cut it out, taped it to the mirror, and had a man of a similar build sit so that his neck lined up with the taped photograph face on the mirror, but occasionally the neck would move a little bit and the head wouldn't. I remember that vividly. So, guys, if you ever watch the Game of Death, like the cut together version of it, first of all, I would suggest you don't do it. But if you do, you're going to get a laugh. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about when that scene pops up, because it's kind of obvious. It's just Bruce Lee's face taped to a mirror with somebody's head down below. But if you want to watch Game of Death, watch the documentary that has the actual footage, and they just sort of cut together what they had. That's actually the better way of looking at that if you want to watch that. Again, we have a different director for Bill and Ted Face the Music, Dean Parasold, who had previously directed Galaxy Quest. So he kind of has his toe in the sci-fi comedy kind of realm. And the footage, as we said at the beginning of the show, they've released for the trailer, looks really good. What was your reaction to the trailer?
I liked the okay. Maybe it ties in with the story. And because he is older, but Ted seemed a little off.
Oh, really?
A little bit to me. Like Alex Winter still seemed very Billish. I was like, oh wow, okay. But Ted, I don't know, he just seemed a little not as, but it may be part of the character, and it may, there may be something that we find out in the movie, but I don't know, there was just something, I don't know, it's just strange when he was talking. I don't know.
Do you think it has anything to do with the image we have of Keanu now as John Wick and as Neo?
No, I've seen that comment in the comment sections of the trailer. People are like, oh, it's John Wick. It's John Wick. No, but it just seemed, I don't know. Because, Ted, I mean, like I said, it is, so many years later.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, yeah, he just didn't seem as what I remember Ted being. But like I said, it could be the passage of time, the fact they haven't done what they've set out to do, and maybe that will all come together in the film.
Yes, because it is a very short trailer.
It is. But I was just kind of like, wow, Bill hasn't changed at all.
Yeah,
to me, he hasn't. It was like, oh my God, it's Bill. And then Ted
he just looks a little older.
Yeah, and Ted just kind of seemed, I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the plot, maybe that's his character arc.
Well, in watching some of the trailer reactions, what I was blown away by was the thing people seemed the most excited about was when Death showed up, because William Sadler is going to return as
I was like, yay!
Yeah, which I had heard he was going to be in the movie as Death, but seeing him again in the whole get-up.
Because remember in the Bogus, remember they plot out the band's career. They show all the clips during the commercial. Not the credits. Mm-hmm. Remember, and it's like he quits the band, starts his own thing, but it flops, and he comes back, and
they go to Mars and all that at the end. Which I guess maybe we're just going to disregard that.
That's what I was wondering. I was like, well, did they do all those things and then they just fizzled out, and that's why they're playing at the crap place now?
Well,
Taco night.
The dialogue in the trailer suggests that like they played for the whole world at the end of Bogus and then just never did anything again, which would discount all of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It's kind of confusing.
But the one thing about these movies is they are keeping continuity from one to the other pretty well. Uh-huh. Probably because, again, you have the creators are writing all of them, which is very unusual.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It's very, it's kind of like I said, I mentioned it, Red Dwarf. The creators have written every season of that, and they don't have anyone else coming in, so it's always very English TV style.
You don't wind up with like a Walking Dead scenario.
Yes.
Where you can see many, many hands have been in that pool over the course of many, many years. Starting, of course, with Frank Darabont, who I know that you prefer.
Yes, I do.
It's hard not to prefer. And again, that goes back to Bill and Ted, because William Sadler is a regular of Frank Darabont's been in all, it was in Shawshank. He was in The Green Mile. He's a regular of theirs. Whenever I think of William Sadler, though, my mind always goes to Die Hard 2, Die Harder. He was the villain in that. And he was such a cold-blooded villain in that, with those steely eyes and everything, and that look, that the pursed lips. I mean, it's like a perfect villain.
Just played Twister.
Yeah, along with the dad from Good Times, because remember, the dad from Good Times was the second villain in that. This is a little bit of a spoiler if you haven't watched Die Hard 2, Die Harder. But
you didn't know you were coming to hear about it, but here we go.
Here we go. But where the hell have you been? That was like,
exactly.
35 years ago?
I know, right?
Yeah, that's almost as old as Bill and Ted.
Unless you're some Ute out there. Say, I'm referencing my cousin Vinny. I'm hitting all the early 90s movies.
Yes.
Ute.
Yes. And
what's a Ute?
And let's hope that unlike Die Hard, Bill and Ted does not go down the road of doing too many of these. I don't think with the large gap between 2 and 3, we're really in danger of that. I think this will probably be the last Bill and Ted movie, and I hope that it goes out on a big note. I was going to say Steven Soderbergh is one of the producers on this movie, so I guess. Okay. Soderbergh, who is a great director in his own right, of course.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he must have been
Bill and Ted.
He must have been a Bill and Ted fan. After many years of pre-production, the filming began last June of 2019, and it's going to be released. Bill and Ted Face the Music, August 21st, 2020, in spite of COVID. So hopefully people will be going back to the theaters by then, and we'll be watching movies the good old-fashioned way by August, and we'll all get to go see Bill and Ted finally face the music. I'm very anxious to see how this comes about, how the trilogy ends, and how the story of Bill and Ted Resolves. So, so yes, I think we had fun today on our Bill and Ted show. And Rebecca, I appreciate you joining me, talking about all this excellent stuff. We're going to have an excellent show. You see how I just keep throwing the excellent in there? We're going to have an excellent show next week. And you'll be here with me, and who knows who else might join us. And you'll find out what the topic is next week when we're talking about it, because we like to keep you in suspense. But until that time comes, I want you all to take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other. Have a good one.